So, for example, Eli Lilly, which actually does branded drug development, they're thinking of generics drug development, actually wants to do some R&D in the region so they can create access to the marketplace. So they restructured their value chain so they can actually have better understanding of the marketplace and better access to the marketplace as well, because they see the marketplace growing. So I'll skip these next couple of pages, but basically different segments of the market have different strategies. So this is the innovative pharmas. They basically focus on cost reduction. That's their primary focus, is cost reduction and risk avoidance. So a couple of things of interest are on the generic side and on the contract manufacturer side, and I'll spend a couple of minutes more on these than the other ones. So this is a summary for generics pharmaceutical manufacturers. And again, don't worry about all the details here, but basically they are looking for 2 or 3 key things. One is building manufacturing capabilities around the world, a footprint around the world. So if they are high cost, they want to be in the low cost countries. If they're low cost, they want to create market access. Second is building some kind of R&D capability. So again, generics manufacturing or generics pharma does not need the same scale, the same caliber of R&D, or the same cost of R&D even, and the risk as well, but does need technology development, does need technology transfer, does need some formulation and developments, and especially if you want to be first to market, some of the data files itself also need expertise that is not typically available unless you have an R&D element in there. And then the last thing that they look for, a combination of things, they look for scale, because they need to have scale to be effective given the low cost margins. When you think about contract manufacturers, slightly different strategy for them. They will basically look to acquire any idle assets because their cost basis needs to be even lower. So they're the ones actually right now looking around the world and saying, which assets can we buy? Private equity investors are backing some of the contract manufacturers and saying, if you can buy assets that Pfizer is shutting down, you can buy them for 10% of their cost basis or the book value, or please go and buy them because we can create a market of that. So this is not necessarily relevant for this region, the contract manufacturing piece, but the generics pharma is definitely very relevant here in the region. So in terms of opportunities for the region, so what I'll describe is actually a couple of things. One is operating model, and the second is the mode of that operating model. And I think there's several folks in the audience today and on the podium today that have actually gone through some of these discussions and analysis. And this will be providing a summary of how we can think about both operating models and the operating modes here. And that's relevant for both manufacturers and investors. So before I do that, just a couple of things to recap. And I think this is the essence of why there's an opportunity and how it can happen. So first of all, the generic demand in the world is increasing. I think Dr. Ahmed, Michael, all the facts point to that. And we can resist it, but the 5 to 6% of the market that is generics today will increase, will double, triple in the next 5 to 7 years. So as a result, the generics demand in the GCC alone, this is not the Middle East. The Middle East is actually double this number. Will grow from 300 million to about 1 billion or even more than that by 2020. So this is a 15% growth rate, and which of us, whether investor or advisor or manufacturer, does not want to be in a 15% growth market, right? That's the kind of market we want to be in. But it could be dependent on what the GCC Middle East governments and healthcare policies do. And those depend upon healthcare spend, of course, but along with that, regulations, as well as trade policies, and some of that could be barriers, trade barriers, import duties and things like that, which may be necessary to impact the market. So depending on different countries' policies, of course, the answers could be different. Third piece is that the generics manufacturers are looking to acquire market access through a variety of means, either through acquiring companies or by partnering with companies in the region. And then lastly, I think governments around the region, whether it's Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, they all are looking to localize production, domestic production, and R&D if possible, and in fact are willing to put in some risk money along with that as well, because the focus on import substitution is important, partly for self-reliance reasons, but partly also for capability development. And so there are various means to do that. So the WTO regime does not yet apply to the GCC. I think there's a window of time before that happens, and that window might be an important policy lever to use by the governments in the region. So I think I mentioned this earlier, sales and manufacturing, so in the bottom half of the page, basically, the opportunity for generics drug manufacturers. So actually, what I've done is looked at innovators, looked at generic manufacturers and contract manufacturing, said the opportunity is in generics manufacturing. And there you could be looking at both end product or in the supply base. So you can be supplying to generics manufacturers, or you could be a supplier of generics to the consumer as well. And so the opportunity is around both sales as well as manufacturing across the value chain. And of course, you need support from the health plans, regulations, and trade incentives. So on the regulations piece itself, I think right now it takes about 18 months to get a generic drug approved in the region, different across countries, and that's way too long. In the US, it takes about 4 months to get a generic drug approved because the branded drug has already been in the market for several years, and so once the generic drug shows the equivalent properties, actually it's not difficult to have it approved. Okay, so again, I don't want to emphasize this page too much, but the key thing was we looked across different pharmaceutical companies, both branded and generics, and how they actually approach emerging markets. And they use multiple strategies, but the key one that is relevant to us is number 3. So number 3 is they focus on selective markets. So I guess in the region, and I think Michael hinted at that, depending on market size, they will focus on different markets. And they will also focus on different therapeutic areas or disease segments. So that's one thing is, since the scale, until the scale emerges, foreign companies will focus on a few segments. So second, on terms of operating models. So there are several elements of the operating model, and I draw your attention to the column on the right, which is for generics companies. This is on R&D. So where is the R&D organization based? What kind of pipeline do you have? What kind of development approach do you have? And what kind of standards do you use? So basically, in R&D for generics, it's actually focused on the market. The lead in that is typically chemistry and formulation. So we actually don't need discovery scientists. We don't need biotech scientists. We actually need chemists and biologists that can understand pathways and the chemistry of the drug. Basically, that's the key thing. Speed is important. So fast to file is important, even in the region, but even outside. And largely, the standards in the region are disparate. So I think if there is one additional thing that this body can do is actually to try and enforce common standards in the region in terms of both development, quality, and so on. The second set of things around generics is around the capabilities and how the teams are organized. So a couple of things, as I said earlier, CMC-driven, with focus on chemistry, analytical analysis, formulation, labs. Some of those work will need to be set up in the region. So that's the kind of thing we need to be thinking about in terms of investments, and also consortia to develop that. And secondly, how we organize is important as well. So it can't be just manufacturing anymore. It has to be manufacturing along with various technical specialists in there. And of course, extensive partnering. So that was sort of a summary of the operating models. Now, there is no single model yet for how we actually develop the operating mode. There are several modes to think about. I think some of you in the region have set up greenfield organizations, which is you said, I will manufacture a bulk chemical to be supplied to the generics of the branded pharma industry. So you can actually do greenfield development. Again, you need some technology, but it's not tremendous. Technology licensing could be another piece, especially as you get into generics, APIs, and so on. There are some process patterns that are available, and again, differ by different chemistries, differ by therapeutic areas, but technology licenses are available, and there's different ways to organize those, and that could be of interest in the GCC. The third one is actually perhaps one of the key interesting ones is all the global generics manufacturers and developers are looking for alliances, minority investments, and especially if a couple of things happen. If the $300 million market for generics does become $1 billion in the next 5-7 years, they will be coming here very fast. Acquisitions, so some of the players outside are looking for acquisitions. So some of the manufacturers in the region are targets for acquisitions, but at the same time, with the capital deployment in the region, could also be looking at acquisitions outside the GCC with the intent to actually create the market here. Now, that has happened in a couple of segments. As you know, Qatar Holding owns, for example, 17% of Volkswagen, right? So that kind of ownership creates the opportunity for some of the global players to be actually incented in various ways to set up regional manufacturing. In Abu Dhabi, Mubadala has invested in several aerospace companies, and as a result, they have an aerospace manufacturing cluster here. So similarly, in the region, there could be investors that are already looking at acquisitions outside the region with the intent to draw them to the market in the region. And lastly, of course, based on technology, based on capital, and based on market access, several kind of joint venture possibilities are there, especially given some of the regulations in the region in terms of local ownership. So that's largely the summary of my talk. So basically, as I said, if you look at the regional market, the global market, one conclusion is the generics market is an interesting one, a big opportunity. It's going to triple in the next 5-7 years, and maybe even more. Then there are several different operating models to actually use in that combination of R&D, manufacturing, as well as distribution. And then along with that, different modes to enter into the marketplace. With that, let me thank you all for your time and look forward to follow-on discussions. Thank you.